night, whichever part of the world and whatever time zone you're joining us from. Welcome! Welcome to the 2023 edition of the Black Consciousness Festival, where we're focusing on healing and reconnection for a second year. The Black Consciousness Festival is a global platform that connects people of African descent with each other by sharing and encouraging exchange through information, traditions, histories, intentions, traumas, celebrations, legacies, stories connecting to pride, power, and practice. Our inaugural year was in 2020, where we created a month of conversations and activities around topics of Black consciousness. In 2021, we had a few events: a youth festival, a weekend of conversations and reparations, and in November, conversations on shift, as we explored the many ways in which we as people of African descent shared and rebirthed elements of ourselves. In 2020, we focused on healing and reconnection for the first time, and we've decided to continue that theme this year because it's so important for us all. The recordings of all of these conversations are available on our website, theblackconsciousnessfestival.com, and our YouTube channel. As you listen to the conversations, we encourage you to be kind to yourself. Pause, breathe consciously, move, and appreciate all that you are. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the Black Consciousness Festival 2023. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce this conversation today on the journey to self-compassion. And so we'll jump right into it. I want to introduce the youth member of our board of directors, Nicholas Ward, who will be facilitating this conversation. Nicholas Ward is a language and culture professional and multidisciplinary artist based in Madrid, Spain currently. He is a Trinidad and Tobago native, of course, and alumnus of the University of the West Indies Psychology and Brazilian Studies units. As an academic and artist, his work focuses on reclaiming and redefining identity for people of African descent in contemporary society. So welcome, Nicholas.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And joining Nicholas today, we have what I would dare to call a good friend and colleague, Laura Jackson. Laura is an RN, registered nurse in the province of Ontario, and an RGN with the Nursing Council of Jamaica. Her approach to health and wellness is holistic and integrative. Laura is the founder of Paradigm Joy, Inc., a mental health and wellness service that offers consultation, retreats, education, and coaching. Laura has been engaged in contemplative practices for as long as she can remember. She is a self-compassion teacher and a meditation and mindfulness facilitator. Throughout her career, she has also worked on the front lines as a clinician, as an educator, in professional practice, and as an administrator in acute and outpatient mental health. So I thank you guys for joining us at the festival and have a good conversation.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Okay, hi Laura, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm fine. So, as Black people, we always like to start things with a ritual. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything planned for today?
Yeah, so I thought, Nicholas, we could start with a brief grounding practice, just to settle in and get ready for the conversation ahead. So I'll start it off. So I invite you to simply settle into your seat wherever you are, and just take a few deep breaths here. Breathing in deep and exhaling long. And on your next exhale, I invite you to close your eyes or simply soften your gaze. And we'll start with noticing the feet touching the floor. Notice the weight of your body in your chair. Relaxing your shoulders. Maybe unclenching your jaw if your jaw is clenched. Softening your face. And just placing your attention on your cheekbones, And now bringing your awareness to your entire body, sitting here today or this evening. And start to tune into your breathing here. Notice your inhale and your exhale. Notice your chest expand on your inhale and gently release on your exhale. There's nothing you need to do with your breath here. Simply breathe. And if a thought or memory intrudes, know that this is completely normal. Simply pull your attention away and come back to the breath, breathing in and exhale out. And now see where you can notice the breath in your body. Is it in your abdomen, in your belly? Do you notice the breath in your chest? Maybe you notice it in your throat. Or maybe you feel it in your nostrils. And to close this practice, I'm going to end with a few words of loving kindness. Feel free to say them along with me or just listen. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I calm my mind. May I be held in compassion. May my sorrows be eased. May I be at peace. We'll do it a couple more times. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I calm my mind. May I be held in compassion. May my sorrows be eased. May I find peace. And one more. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I calm my mind. May I be held in compassion. May my sorrows be eased. May I find peace. And when you're ready, I invite you to slowly open your eyes if your eyes were closed. It's coming back to your room and eventually the screen.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Laura. So yeah, I think we're ready now to get into the conversation. To start, I think we need to address the stigma that exists in the Black community around mental health. I'm sure, as a psychology psychiatry professional, you are aware, you have had experiences, or just as a Black person navigating your own life, you have had experiences where you recognize that there's a stigma around mental health in our community, whether it be denial or refusal to accept things like depression and anxiety. And as Black people, we are actually more predisposed to these, how do we say, abnormalities than other groups. So what do you think about the stigma?
Yeah, thank you, Nicholas. Yeah, stigma is a huge part of people seeking treatment or even talking about their mental health, especially in our community. I mean, I think for some, even still today, they don't consider mental health actually health, right? So mental health is health, just like physical health, so to speak, right? So it includes our emotions, right? The way we relate to people, our well-being. It dictates how we act, how we respond to stress, and interact with people. It's a huge part of who we are. So I think that's part of the piece with stigma. People don't even recognize it as something that's legitimate, you know? So when you talk about stigma, what comes to mind for me, and I think it is actually the true definition of stigma, is prejudice with discrimination equals stigma, right? So I know for some reasons, people don't want to talk about mental illness, mental health, for fear of being judged, labeled, right? So the stigma, unfortunately, that's out there is so hurtful, you know, and detrimental. I think the stat I read, 40% of people don't seek treatment because of the stigma related to just coming out and saying, I'm struggling with my mental health, right? That's huge. And I think too, for our community, when we've been or may have experienced so much adversity, to sort of admit that you might be struggling, there's a lot of shame with that, right? People don't want to talk about it, right? They don't think it's a valid concern, and they struggle in silence, right? But what I can say is I do think it is changing. You know, conversations like today and just talking about mental health make a big difference. I was looking at more of the stats on mental health and wellness and illness. I'll just read a couple just to show like it's common, right? It can happen to any one of us, and the community is there to support you, right? So I pulled some stats. So in Canada, where I spend most of my time, mental illness affects more than 6.7 million people, right? It's not a small number. 1 in 2 have had a mental illness by the time they reach the age of 40. The cost to society, so it costs the Canadian economy $51 billion, right? So these are staggering numbers. That goes to show it's not just, you know, you solely alone, right? Whoever's out there that might be struggling. Some stats on suicide. So 4,500 Canadians die by suicide every year. And when looking at the states, it's even more staggering. This is from, I believe the CDC, I pulled it from, 50,000 Americans die by suicide each year. 1 in 2 struggle with getting the help they need. 1 in 4 experience high levels of anxiety, right? So just hearing those things, right? Stigma makes it even worse. But also hearing these stats, it could be any one of us. And it is, right? It is.
Exactly.
It's in our community. And as I said, the community is here to rally and support if it's needed. Yeah.
And I wanted to expand a bit on the shame around mental health, and especially in our community, you know, for centuries, I think we have been a workforce, whether forced or otherwise. And you know, it's difficult for us to admit that we are not able to do things that we are used to doing every single day because we have been ascribed value to our able to work, you know, as labor. And I think, maybe that's where some of the shame comes from as well, in a capitalist society, in a post-colonial society where our minds and bodies have been exploited so much for labor. And now all of a sudden, we are not able to perform the way that we used to, you know, in labor. It can be difficult to admit that.
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you can speak.
Yeah, no, just what was coming to mind was even trying to get to the place of taking a break or 5 minutes to yourself. That could be seen as being lazy, right? But these are things like rest are things that we deserve. And we truly need to rejuvenate our bodies and to feel well, right? To live to our full potential. We need rest, right? But as you alluded to, there's that view, right, of work, 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 right? That's been ingrained. And that was part of, right, history. But we truly are deserving of this.
Exactly. You know, I I always quote from the NAP ministry that rest is resistance. And I think we have been branded the stereotype for a long time of being lazy. But if you look around, as a result of systemic racism alone, it's difficult for us to, in many countries where we exist as Black people, to acquire education in the same way that other groups might be, and to climb the corporate ladder, and to participate in capitalism in the same way that other people are able to. So then we're forced to undertake more jobs than other people. You find a lot of people of color in general, and Black people, especially in like immigrant communities. I've seen for myself here in Spain, a lot of Black and brown people of color, holding multiple jobs and not getting sleep. And that in turn also negatively affects our mental health.
Yeah.
Stress is a big part of our community.
Absolutely. Yeah, stress is, there's good stress, right? So it helps us achieve certain things, right? It might help us perform a task better. To a certain point, stress is good, right? And as what you're alluding to, when it becomes chronic, right, it starts to really play on all systems of our body, right? And especially in our community where some of us were predisposed to certain chronic conditions, stress can actually make it worse. So it's even more imperative to have these conversations about knowing your stats, right? And also trying to regulate your stress, right? So what works for you? What are your warning signs? How do you know you're stressed out? Looking at the bigger picture, what's on your plate? What can you maybe let go of? Maybe put aside, maybe set better boundaries. What are your triggers? What helps to mitigate, right? Or to sort of calm yourself when you're feeling stressed, right? And also, what can you do every day, right, to support stress reduction in your life, right? So a daily habit is so important when we're talking about stress reduction.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I feel like this week alone, I remember maybe Tuesday or Monday, texting one of my friends saying that I feel burnt out from racism alone. I can feel that I'm stressed and tired solely from having to, I don't know, suppress myself from responding to the way someone stared at me on the metro, or to being pushed, or the comments that you hear behind your back. Just navigating life in general as a Black person and experiencing racism is exhausting, and it contributes to stress, and then in turn our reactions and lack thereof, because it also takes energy for us to tell ourselves, okay, this is not worth responding to, it's only going to lead to something that will get me in trouble. That also takes a toll on our bodies and minds. What are some ways that you think that we can tangibly, mitigate these issues?
Yeah, so I think, managing stress, right? There's so many different ways that you can go about it. That's the beauty of it. You can cultivate your own practice. For me personally, I like to spend time in nature, talk, right? Spend time with like-minded people, exercise, moving our bodies, doing things really that nurture me, right? I've heard other people like to sing, to dance. Definitely deep breathing exercises is popular and helps to really downregulate the nervous system when you're at your highest point of stress. These are just a few things, to try, right? They may not resonate, but there's like a whole list of things that one can try to reduce their stress. Breathing, I would say, is probably one of the top that I hear a lot of people try and say works. Just even 5 minutes a day can help.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of your work recently has been revolving around self-compassion. Can you explain to us a bit about self-compassion, and maybe how we can integrate that also into our daily lives, for our own health and wellness?
Yeah, absolutely. So self-compassion is essentially turning compassion towards ourselves, right? So I'll ask you, Nicholas, when you hear the word compassion, what comes to mind?
When I hear compassion, I think of things like patience and consolation. Immediately, that's what comes to my mind.
Yeah. So compassion is that desire to support and also to act to alleviate another person's suffering, right? It's an act of benevolence to see the person's humanity and help them in that moment of struggle. So self-compassion, essentially turning that on ourselves. Okay, so with self-compassion, I'll quote one of the researchers on self-compassion, Dr. Neff. With self-compassion, we treat ourselves the same way we would treat a dear friend who is struggling or suffering or having a hard time. Okay, so that's it really in a nutshell. It's really turning that compassion towards ourselves. And if we think of maybe a time when a friend was struggling, or if you're a caregiver caring for somebody, what you did for them or how you cared for them when they were struggling, I'm sure you would have acted with, thoughtfulness, compassion, guidance. You would have shared positive words with them, supported them. And I encourage, you or whoever is listening to think about, well, what does it look for me when I'm struggling? And is it the same, right? Because sometimes there's a mismatch, right? We're not as compassionate towards ourselves than we are to other people. And that's part of the journey, right, of self-compassion. It takes practice, and it's a skill that can be cultivated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think self-compassion, as you defined it, is very important to us as Black people. I think we have inherited a lot of, for example, prejudices that we carry through colonization and through enslavement. And, a lot of my work has and continues to revolve around identity. So things like colorism and texturism that we navigate on a daily basis. I think a lot of us have issues with the way we see ourselves, and we don't feel, I don't know, maybe comfortable in our own bodies. And then it's reinforced when we go outside and we are told things like, in order to work here, you cannot wear your natural hair. Or in schools as well, I've had that happen to me in high school. I had to cut my hair because they would not allow me to wear my hair the way it is. So that then forced me to kind of have to, retrain myself to see my hair as being acceptable, socially acceptable. And I think it can be difficult for us in that sphere alone to have compassion for ourselves and our bodies.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's these are layers and barriers that can get in the way, right? For us to really recognize that we're deserving of compassion, right? Of a meaningful life, right? Of joy, of love and respect. With self-compassion, I should mention there are actually, when you break it down again, 3 components, right? So first, we need to be aware that we're suffering and of our struggles, right? So with self-compassion, we want to meet our struggles and challenges with awareness or consciousness or mindfulness, right? So it's that non-judgmental present moment awareness, right? Or paying attention on purpose. And with mindfulness and self-compassion, what it does, it helps us not to over-identify, right? With whatever is going on around us, right? We have that awareness, so we can now act. The next part of self-compassion is turning to our suffering, our struggles, misgivings with kindness, right? So it's really easy to give into that negative critic, right? We all have that negative critic in our head that says, you're not this, you're not good enough, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to turn away from that. If we turn to our misgivings and struggles with kindness, we can start to quiet that voice of that negative critic. And over time, slowly try to build that compassionate voice. With kindness, we recognize that some of these challenges are a part of part of human experience, right? Unfortunate and as bad as they are, right? Trying to turn to it with kindness is very challenging. Self-compassion, it seems like a sort of fluffy thing, but it actually does take work, right?
Yeah.
And the last big part of self-compassion is really recognizing common humanity. So that's really recognizing the bigger picture. Okay, so recognizing that you're not alone, right? And your challenges and your struggles. So everything that you spoke about, Nicholas, I could think in my head, oh yeah, been there. I know how that feels in my soul and my heart. I've experienced that.
Yeah.
So common humanity helps us to, say, I'm not alone in this. There are other people who have gone through this. And I can get through it. I can navigate it with that support in mind. When we have a tunnel vision of just me, it's just happening to me, our focus narrows, and that can even make it worse for us, right? There comes the stigma, the shame with thinking you're the only person in the world that is going through this, and there's something wrong with you when there's not. So that's the beauty of common humanity. I actually came across a quote, if you don't mind if I read it, by James Baldwin. Yeah, it really sums up the essence of common humanity. So yeah, this is from James Baldwin, Life magazine in 1963. So what he says, you think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world. But then you read, it was books that taught me that the things that tormented me the most were the very things that connected me with all the people who are alive, who have ever been alive. Right? To me, that speaks to the essence of this one last ingredient, so to speak, of self-compassion, is that collectiveness, that common humanity, right? We're wired for connection as human beings, right? It's a protective factor for our mental health, right? And it's a very important part of self-compassion.
Yeah, I'm glad that earlier on as well that you mentioned that it is not easy, because for example, recently I found myself struggling with this as well. So I had an experience where I went to a club with some of my friends here in Madrid. I was the only Black person in the group. At the front of the line, the security guard held me back, pulled one of my friends from behind me, sent them through, pulled another one, sent them through. And then I said, but I'm with them. The security guard completely ignores me, holds me even tighter, and continues to pull more people from behind me in the line to enter the club. And it took one of my friends, my white friends, in front of the line, saying to the security guard, hey, he's with us, what's the issue, let him through, for them to just immediately release me and let me through. And I thought to myself, this is wrong, and this is going to happen to someone else. This has happened to someone else before me as well. And as an activist, or just simply as a human being, you mentioned also about community, and that's something that I always try to integrate into my daily life. This idea of individualism is something that we inherited from European colonization. So I feel like in my daily life as a Black person, I need to walk with community, and I have a responsibility to my community. So I thought to myself, and I reached out also to some of my POC friends here in Madrid, how can I stop this from happening? And one of my friends said, well, there isn't really much you can do. You can write like a Google review, for example. So I said, yeah, I'll definitely do that. But when I sat down to relive that experience, that embarrassing experience, to write this Google review, I just felt exhausted. Yeah. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to take a nap. But then also, I told myself that I'm being coward, I'm being complacent, and that, this is my responsibility. And now it's going to happen to someone else because I couldn't stop it, or I didn't want to stop it. How do you think we can, in navigating self-compassion, how do you think we can kind of mitigate these feelings as well?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Nicholas. That must have been, sounds like such a horrible experience. I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Yeah.
What I would say is the fundamental question of self-compassion, what it asks of us is, what do I need in this moment? right? So that's an important first step, is to ask, what do I need? So in what you've shared with me, you thought about, reaching out and doing something, but what you really needed was to pause. That's really an important step with self-compassion, is asking, what do I need in this moment? It doesn't mean that you can't do whatever after, but it's always coming back to, what do I need in this moment to feel safe and secure? Okay. The other arm of self-compassion, although it is a very nurturing practice, it's also a very strong practice, right? And what I mean by that, in the literature, sometimes they call it fierce, right? So there's that fierce end of self-compassion. So that's the end where you really set strong boundaries. You say no, right? You set boundaries to take care of yourself until you're ready to come back, right? Until you're well enough, right? So self-compassion can also be strong and fierce in setting boundaries. And that's what it sounds like you did for yourself in that moment, right? And even you talking about it today, sharing it with the world, that's the activist coming out, I'm sure, right? There's so many people watching that have said, oh my goodness, right? I can connect with Nicholas because of that experience, right? So you're not alone in that. And you've shared something with us that's very enlightening, right? To understand, well, how can we act differently in the world so it doesn't happen again, right? What would I do in that situation? So thanks for sharing that. Although in the moment you didn't feel like you acted on it, you acting on it now by talking to us about it has inspired many people now, right? To do something.
Yeah, thank you. And you shared a lot so far, a lot of strategies that we can use to, incorporate self-compassion into our daily lives. But I wanted to ask you as well, have you recognized in our own culture and community as Black people any of these or any, ritual or any strategies that we have inherently in our community and our culture that maybe we never realized were acts of self-compassion or
Absolutely. So I'd say all of the components I mentioned, right, can be described in a different way, right, in an Afrocentric way. The way I've described it is based on just the training that I've gone through in years, but all the things that we're talking about, they're really embedded, I would say, in African values and culture and part of our heritage, right? So number one, again, is that community part is so important, right? Other, I guess, sort of ways to nurture self-compassion that resonate, I'd say, are dance, right? Singing, moving the body. So these activities that get the body moving are somatic in nature. I've seen resonate more, right? Singing, right? Information sharing, right? Raising awareness, right? Raising consciousness, right? Discussions, right? Huddling, that kind of thing. So
and I just want to mention to everyone watching that this is, this sums up perfectly the theme of this year's festival, and the importance of reconnection for healing. A lot of these things that we need right now to heal ourselves from the trauma that we experienced and are experiencing are right there in our cultures and in our communities. And we just need to tap back in, reach in there and pull them out, And also, Laura, as a, mental health practitioner, what do you think other mental health professionals like yourself can do to, to kind of utilize self-compassion or any other strategy for, this stress and this, that Black people experience in their daily lives?
Yeah. So as mental health professionals, I'd say if you're not aware of what self-compassion is, educate yourself, right? And also if you're working with the Black community, educate yourself about our experience, right? Things like racial stress, trauma, what's it like to walk in our shoes? again, as I said, the primary question of self-compassion is asking yourself, what do I need in this moment? So as a coach, therapist, counselor, traditional healer, if you're doing all the talking, right, or dictating, that's not self-compassion, right? You want to be walking alongside your client, your friend, your family member to help them cultivate, right? And to help them get there, right? To whatever they need to feel whole and well. So I would say those are the main things, is educating and remembering to put the person at the center. The one thing about self-compassion is a strength-based process and practice. So we're focusing on our strengths, right? It definitely is a journey because you're going to be thinking about all these things that, might come up that are negative, right? That negative critic can be so loud in our head. But as I said, the compassionate voice is louder, right? And remembering it's a journey, right? A simple practice, 5 minutes a day, right, can start to build that within your mental health practice.
Yeah, and you mentioned, recognizing the struggles of the people that you work with. And, I just wanted to ask something a bit controversial, I guess. Then with that, do you think then maybe that Black people should solely seek out mental health professionals that are also Black? Because, for example, in our community, I know a lot of us feel uncomfortable, for example, going to like a hairstylist who is not Black because maybe they do not know how to, manipulate our hair.
Absolutely.
What do you think about
I hear you.
only seeking out Black therapists and psychiatric professionals?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's I guess it's really up to the person, I would say, right? It's what works best for that individual. First and foremost, I think the therapeutic relationship is so important, right? So regardless of if the person's Black or white. So I think it really is up to the individual. We're fortunate now, today, there's choice. There are more Black therapists, coaches, counselors out there. You can simply search online, go to a directory and search if that's what you're looking for. And, your example with the hairdresser is so very true with a counselor, coach, or therapist. I mean, I've had people reach out to me and solely say they only want to work with a Black therapist and individual because of the shared experience, right? Yeah. So I guess for me, what is, it makes me feel good that it's more accessible now. I mean, 10 years ago, you'd have a hard time, but now therapists, coaches, counselors are stepping up to say, I want to work with my community. What can I do to be of support, and seeking out opportunities to support each other. So there's more opportunity now. There's more groups now available, online directories of Black therapists, right? Because, sometimes, again, the stigma, people don't want to go because it's a white therapist or a person that's not Black or whatever. Because of the horrible experience they had, right, with a sort of, Western general hospital, therapist or whatever, right, in the general system. So it was all that there was, and it was actually quite damaging. So now there's actually opportunity for that not to happen, with skilled and trained professionals who are Black, right, who are willing to support. So I think, again, it comes down to the person's choice, but there's more opportunity, right? And there's that connection that happens,
And I think this goes back also to us really needing to break the stigma, because we need to have conversations like the one that we're having right now. We need to be incorporated into, psychiatry and psychology, because we also, have to seek out professionals, and these professionals need to be aware of our struggles. Yes. And, it's not a one size fit all solution when it comes to anything related to your body or your mind. And that's why I think it's important for us to be incorporated into these things. For example, I've always felt like, psychology and psychiatry, there's a lot more work to be done, and we are
Yes.
seeing that, because a lot of the way in which we define abnormal psychology, for example, is very Eurocentric, and it seems very often that what we define as an abnormality is just someone who doesn't fit into the capitalist system of being able to sit down and work
Right.
all day or something. For example, if we're defining things like schizophrenia, when it comes to people in the Black community that practice African spirituality, who may claim that they communicate with spirits, that can be controversial in psychiatry or psychology. Then when it comes to hallucinations, in abnormalities like schizophrenia, for example.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it all goes back to why we need to be included into these conversations, and we need to, share to the world our experiences and the way in which we walk life, and how we as Black people think and behave and navigate this system.
Absolutely. I've been around a long time in the mental health system, and there was nothing available when I first started. Nothing, right? It was that that model of healthcare, right? It's almost like it serves a purpose, right? But it wasn't culturally focused. There was no awareness. There was no competence on the end of the practitioners. And as I said, things have changed tremendously where we sit today, right? There are opportunities to work with Black therapists, counselors, coaches, healers, organizations that will rally around you and support you, right, in your health and wellness journey that weren't available, over 2 decades ago. So that's the good news, right? And I know of, at least in the Toronto area, there are emerging organizations. And again, if you're looking for a community center, you can start by, just asking word of mouth, reaching out to your connections. There are Afrocentric community health centers in Toronto, which I have sought out to collaborate with and connect with, that focus on the health and well-being of people of the African diaspora. I've also know that there's mental health programs specific that work with people in the Black community, right? So it's there's opportunity now that there wasn't before, which is very hopeful, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to say thank you so much, Laura, for sitting down with me and having this much needed conversation around our minds as, people of African descent. And thank you to everyone that tuned in with us today, to be a part of this, to listen and to learn. I also learned a lot from our conversation. I thank you for that, Laura. And yeah.
Thank you, Nicholas. My pleasure. It's great to be here, and enjoy the rest of the festival.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.